Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translate. I'm the deep voice guy this morning. I could do In a World. I could do movie trailers this morning. Today, In a World, it's the weekly top 3. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, is ready to join us here. He's waiting in the wings in the green room, and we're about to dive into it and get some details on all the good stuff that's going on out there, or not so good stuff that's going on out there. I mean, what was one of the three? We got a 1 in 3 chance of having good stuff, and never mind. It's going to be all bad. All right, we're ready to go, and we're going to jump into it here. Chris Story will be joining us in hour 2. And we'll be talking with him about our weekly positivity update and everything else that's going on. Today's topics with Brad include the RCA and the DNR and the Cook Inlet. We're going to talk about the draft budget from the House Finance and how the legislature already has too much power. So let's, without further ado, let's jump right into that and figure this out and get things rocking and rolling. Brad Keithley. Again this morning. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Michael, I'm doing great today. Are some days better voice days than others?
It's surprisingly, there are certain days where I'm like, man, I really wish I had an audition for a movie trailer. Today is the day. It's like some days are very deep and low and other. Anyway, yeah, so it happens sometimes. So but today would be a disaster movie. That's all I'm saying. Disaster movie day.
Remember, it's Truth Tuesdays.
It's Truth Tuesdays. There we go. Truth Tuesdays. And we're about to get some lowdown. I don't even know, Brad. I can't even. After my conversation yesterday with Rob Myers and everything, and what's potentially happening with the budget and the quid pro quo, the back and forth, I don't know. So anyway, you're going to start me off today, and we're going to talk about the Draft House Finance Committee bill for budgets. And give me your thoughts here. Let's get the rundown rolling here.
Well, this budget really has made me focus on something that I've sort of known all along, and we've talked about in various ways all along, but it sort of brought it head first. And there's a op-ed that I read that was in the ADN that sort of goes along that same line, sort of makes me realize what's really going on here. The op-ed was from about a week ago, actually. It says, when it comes to state investments, do PFDs provide enough return? And here's sort of the realization that I come to from time to time. There are two ways to look at the PFD. One is as a spending category. And that's how the legislature has looked at it since 2017. And they look at it as sort of the leftover or sort of the marginal source of, or the marginal spend, and compare all of the other spending categories to it when they decide on what the PFD amount's going to be. And it's because the PFD is just always at risk in that environment, looking at it that way, because the PFD doesn't have a lobby group behind it on the ground in Juneau, going from office to office, saying, the return on this is great. It's better than other things. Whereas other things like education or the university or other categories of spending do have lobbying troops on the ground, paid, ironically enough, by the legislature through the appropriations to these different groups, lobbying groups on the ground, paid to go from office to office and say, hey, look at our thing. It's a lot better than that PFD thing. And so you end up with a situation where, the PFD is always sort of last, and it always takes it in the chin with whatever the other lobbying or the lobbying groups are out there pushing. You can see that in this budget. I mean, Delana has put forward a budget. Delana Johnson, Valley Representative Delana Johnson, so-called conservative rep Delana Johnson, has put forward a budget that spends a lot on other things. And when you get to the PFD, it is 30-70 PFD. We used to be, at a statutory PFD. Then for a while, the House was at a 50-50 PFD.
Right.
Now they're down to a 30-70 PFD, which I suppose they claim is better than the Senate's by 5%. So, but that's one way to look at the PFD. That's not the way that all of the economic analyses that we've seen over the years have looked at the PFD. They look at the PFD as a source of funding, PFD cuts as a source of funding, and compare those PFD cuts to other potential sources of revenue and say, look, if you're going to use if you use PFD cuts, they have the largest adverse impact on the overall economy compared to those other alternatives. And they are by far, I'm quoting ICER studies now, by far the costliest to Alaska families of all of those other sources of funding. And when you look at the PFD cuts as a source of funding, the PFD is certainly the preferable use of funds. And if you need additional funds, if you have a deficit and you need additional funds, one of those other sources of funds, oil taxes, flat tax, sales tax, on down the line, one of those other sources of funding is much the better way to do it. The legislature has always looked at it the first way. They've always looked at it as a spending category and always compared it to the other spending categories and always put it last because in part, the PFD doesn't have troops on the ground, doesn't have, feet on the ground in Juneau pushing their point of view. But when the economists look at it, they've always looked at it the other way and said, look, we shouldn't be cutting PFDs. We should be using one of these other sources of revenue, which have a far lower impact on the Alaska economy, bring in revenues from non-residents, which PFD cuts don't do, and reduce the impact on Alaska families and on the Alaska economy as a result of bringing in revenues from other locations. And from an economic perspective, you ought to be using one of those other options. The legislature's never, ever, ever looked at it that way. They've always looked at it the first way because they don't want to have to look at taxes. They don't want to have to look at other sources of revenue. Even though they're not going to cut the budget enough to pay a full PFD, they don't want to look at alternatives for filling those deficits. And it's frustrating when you get into a discussion about the PFD. It's very frustrating to me when you get into a discussion about the PFD that you have all these people who suddenly run to that side of the boat, say it's a spending category. It's a spending category, and look at it compared to all these other alternatives that we have. These paid lobbyists down there, the legislature's paid lobbyists down there, pushing. It's a spending category. It's a spending category. And we can't spend on that if we need to be spending on other things, as opposed to looking at it the way the economists do and say, no, it's a revenue category. PFD cuts are revenue. And here's all of the other revenue sources you could be pursuing that would have a far lower impact on the Alaska economy and a far lower impact on Alaska families. And it's just frustrating. These discussions are always frustrating. And this budget cycle is going to be frustrating again, because the legislature is going to be talking, if you will, in one language. PFD is spending. And I and others are going to be looking at it in another language. PFD cuts as revenues. And we're going to be saying, you are choosing the absolute worst possible of all the alternatives. You're choosing the absolute worst alternative for how to close these budget deficits. You're hurting Alaska families. You're hurting the overall Alaska economy. And they're not going to engage. They're not going to discuss that issue. We're not going to have a discussion on that issue.
You can't even have a good rational argument or debate with somebody if you can't agree on the foundational principles of the debate. And that's where we're at. They see a potato, we see a tomato. And that's you can't even have a real argument with people. I've had arguments with people who believe that the PFD is, like you said, the welfare, the state spending and everything. They don't believe it's the people's money. You can't have the argument with you if you can't even agree on the foundational component of the discussion. And I mean, this is a fairly new problem. This is a problem that's only been here the last 8 years, right? I mean, since 2016. It's only been here 8 years. Before that, it was a pass through. It was never a state spending category. It just went through. And so this is a fairly new and recent development, but it's like we've totally lost that battle in that regard.
Yeah, and Hammond looked at it as PFD cuts of spending, because he said, look, if you get to the point where you've used the other half for government spending, and that's still not enough, you're still running deficits, then you should be using taxes. I mean, he understood that you shouldn't, that PFD cuts, using PFD cuts as a way of filling the deficit, was wrong economically, was hard on the Alaska economy, was hard on Alaska families. And so he talked about it in terms of taxes. But none of these legislators want to do it that way. And I go back to a column I wrote a few weeks ago. I go back to a couple of things. One, a column I wrote a couple of weeks ago, which is, now that they've passed, particularly now that they've passed the legislative salary increases, all of the legislators are in the top 20%. And so they're not viewing PFD cuts in the same way as it affects the other 80% of Alaska families. They're viewing PFD cuts as their cheapest way out to them personally, to they and their families, and to their donors, the cheapest way out of filling the budget gaps. And they say to themselves, well, we don't have to say no to any of these lobbyists that are walking the hall. We can say yes to all these lobbyists that are walking the hall. And we can fill the budget gap in a way that really doesn't affect me much personally. That's one. And the other is we've got a governor. I mean, I don't want to leave him out of this. We've got a governor who occasionally dips in and says, like he did last spring, well, you know, what we ought to be targeting is the thing that has the lowest, the broadest impact, the lowest impact on any one segment of the Alaska economy, the lowest impact on Alaska families. And so he said at the time, I'm going to propose a sales tax. And then he forgets he says that. and he goes back to saying no taxes. And so you've just got a situation in Juneau that is just off on this tangent about PFDs are spending. And so we're going to compare them to all the other spending. And because they don't have lobbyists, because PFDs don't have lobbyists that walk in our office and give us all these charts and graphs about how good they are, you know, they're the last on the list. We got to satisfy the lobbyists for all the other things before we get there.
Well, surprisingly, up to 8 years ago, nobody would have ever considered that viewpoint because they thought that the electorate would come out them with pitchforks and torches and knives and axes. And after Walker did it, it really didn't happen. There wasn't as much. I mean, I was shocked. I was shocked that the pushback was not vociferous and that the Senate didn't stand up to that veto and try and override it and everything else. And people kind of went meh, which is unfortunate. But that's kind of where we ended up being when it was all said and done. All right, Brad, give me a tease for number two.
Number two, we're going to go back to the Cook Inlet and talk about gas for a while. I think we're getting the cart in front of the horse here in terms of how we're approaching the Cook Inlet. And I want to go back to that and talk about it for a while because I think we need to focus on getting the process right, getting the horse in front of the cart before we start going down this road.
All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We'll continue here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Don't forget to join us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Michael Duke Show /live. If you want to jump right to the video that's going on right now. We'll return with Brad Keithley right after this.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay. Welcome back. We'll talk about the Baltimore Bridge here when we get done with Brad. There's some dramatic video of that if you haven't seen it yet. I just dropped it in the chat room there. The cargo container ship hitting the bridge at 1:30 this morning, dropping it into the bay. That was I have questions. Anyway, we'll discuss that. Brad continues with us here this morning. There's a lot about the PFD, but not a lot about the budget, Brad. What were your thoughts on the overall? It obviously the PFD plays into what's going on there, but you know, the Senate is going to see that, and they are locked and loaded on this whole 75-25. That's their fiscal plan. Don't you dare change it. And now we're hearing things like maybe they'll be delaying the capital budget going over to the House as retribution or what. I mean, I don't know. This is like a pissing match back and forth on this deal. What do you think about that part of it anyway?
Well, the Senate's plan is 25-75, but that's only the Senate's plan. I mean, the House hasn't passed it. The governor hasn't adopted it. We'll talk a little bit about that in the third segment, but it's the Senate being the bully, right? I mean, it's the Senate saying it's our way or the highway. Thank you very much. And if you don't go down our highway, we're going to do all sorts of things to make your life more miserable. And and Delana, 3070 isn't all that different from 2575 yet. It seems to have triggered the Senate's retribution for, oh my God, you didn't pay attention to our 2575.
How dare you don't do what we told you to do? Yesterday, I mentioned it yesterday. This is actually the first time that I saw any written or news reporting on the agreement between the House and the Senate in the leadership, where apparently they'd agreed on a timeline to when they were going to finish each bill. House was going to finish the operating budget, Senate was going to finish the capital budget. And I didn't realize that there was like a written agreement. And now Rob confirmed it yesterday that there was an actual written agreement between the leadership. And now the Senate's breaking that. I mean, how can you negotiate with people who can't even hold to their word? Not simply because there was mechanical or something going on, but obviously in a fit of pique, they decided, how dare you not do what we tell you to do, and we're going to change things. Yeah. I mean, how can you ever negotiate or work with people like that?
You can't. I mean, they don't want to negotiate. They just want you to adopt. They just want you to adopt what they're doing. And until the governor and the House push back in some way, the House by not passing what the Senate sends over, or the governor just vetoing the whole mess and saying we're starting over if you can't play according to the rules that even you agreed to. Until the House and the governor step up to the plate and push back, the Senate's just going to keep doing it. Bullies keep bullying until somebody stands up.
Punch them right in the face. That's the only time they stop, is when somebody punches them right in the face. That's what needs to. I mean, proverbially, not literally, but you're right. Somebody needs to stand up to them and say no. And they just can't keep getting away with it. That's kind of the whole point here.
Michael, on the budget as a whole, we would be having a far different discussion if the marginal source of revenue was some form of broad-based tax. Because just imagine if there was a proposal to increase education spending, or a proposal to increase childcare, or a proposal to increase anything in the House that had to be paid for by additional taxes. Will Stapp, for one, Jesse Sumner, for another, would be saying, oh no, we can't burden ourselves with additional taxes to pay for that spending. And we would have a much different look going on at the budget than we do, a much more critical look at these spending categories than we do with PFD cuts. But using PFD cuts as a marginal source of revenue. But we're never going to have that discussion. We're never going to have a good budget discussion about the trade-offs as long as they use the PFD cuts as the marginal source of revenue, regardless of what impact it has on the Alaska economy and Alaska families. We're never going to have that discussion because it doesn't affect them and it doesn't affect their donors.
All right, 10 seconds. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. You're such a ray of sunshine. I shouldn't blame Brad. It's not his fault. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
I feel attacked by that. I mean, I paid that guy to say stuff, and I feel attacked. That may not have been a good investment, All right, welcome back to the program, the Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. It's the only way I can get you to laugh, Brad. It's the only way I can do it. Otherwise, you just rage against the machine over here. Let's move on to number 2 of the weekly top 3. And this is the RCA, which is the
Regulatory Commission of Alaska.
Right, which deals with utilities and regulating utilities in Alaska. And the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, you argue that they have frontline responsibility on the Cook Inlet situation, and the legislature should only get involved after that. But instead, the legislature is putting this as some kind of front and center issue.
Right.
There you go. So there you go.
All right. So there's an article in the Frontiersman written by Tim Bradner this week yesterday. The headline is NSTAR CEO says Cook Inlet gas shortfall more serious than thought earlier, by Tim Bradner for the Frontiersman. And Tim's reporting on a speech that John Sims, who's the president of NSTAR, gave to the RDC, the Resource Development Council, last week, and saying that, you know, we're facing a more serious, Sims is saying NSTAR gas is facing a more serious threat in the Cook Inlet than we thought. Here's what should be going on. The RCA, the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, has responsibility by statute, by law, to second guess the utilities, to look over the utilities, to regulate the utilities, to make sure that they provide adequate service. If you have the president of one of the utilities out there, the primary gas utility, saying we have a serious shortfall coming up, the RCA the next day should be hauling that president in before the RCA and say, okay, what do you mean? Tell us what's going on. Let's define the problem. Let's define the problem we're facing. And while the RCA is engaged in a series of overview hearings with the South Central utilities about what their situation is about gas, they're not doing that. They're not hauling Sims in and saying, you tell us what's going on and you tell us what your plan is. And we, with our statutory responsibility, are going to define the plan and find a way forward. Separately, the Department of Natural Resources has authority over leases in the Cook Inlet, over production from the Cook Inlet, almost all of which is state leases. And the DNR has the authority to reduce the royalty on those leases in order, if there's a need for incentives to bring about additional production. In fact, they have the very authority to a large extent. They have the very authority the RC or the legislature is considering giving them now. The legislature, though, wants to sort of override the DNR and say we're going to give royalty relief to the leases regardless. The DNR's authority is circumscribed by saying you have the authority to give relief to the leases if they need it. And so the DNR can step in there and say, do you need additional royalty relief in order to incentivize additional production? So the RCA has the obligation to regulate these utilities, to look at their supply situation, to make sure they're taking the steps necessary to have adequate supply. And the DNR has the authority to come in to leases. And if producers are saying we don't have enough incentive, there isn't enough economic incentive to develop this additional acreage, the DNR has the authority to give them relief, to provide them with the economics to go ahead and do the additional development. What's happening is, notwithstanding the RCA has this obligation to come in and regulate, come in and control the situation, come in and tell the utilities to tell them what's going on, and the DNR has the ability to give relief on the other side to incentivize the producers to produce more. Notwithstanding that we have these two regulatory authorities, we have the legislature back there considering, massive royalty relief to producers in the Cook Inlet, just sort of, off the top, as their way of incentivizing some response to this situation. And what I'm concerned is going to happen is we're going to give way more relief, way more incentives than are needed in order to develop the additional supplies. And what I'm also concerned is we're going to create these subsidies out there for those producers to develop additional supplies, subsidies that are going to cost Alaskans in terms of reduced PFDs, develop these additional subsidies, give them these additional subsidies to develop the supply, even though we may not need it, even though they may have developed the additional supplies without the subsidies. That's what DNR is supposed to go and assess. If you need additional relief, we have the authority to give it to you, but only to the extent you need the additional relief. They have to delve into it.
Well, and I think what you're saying here, just to simplify it for those of us who are, talk to me like I'm 5, is essentially the moment that a issue becomes politicized, it immediately becomes, exponentially more expensive in the long run, and usually doesn't reach a satisfactory conclusion. I mean, that's historically, anytime an issue becomes politicized, it immediately becomes vastly more expensive and usually does not end well in the long run. That's usually what we find out historically.
Yeah, I mean, and the early the reimbursable credits we gave producers in the Cook Inlet in the early 20 teens is a good example of that. We spent a massive amount of money pumping money, reimbursable credits into Cook Inlet producers, and we didn't get a really good supply response. And so, yes, we solved the issue politically, pumped money at them. The legislature pumped money at them, and it cost a lot of money. And we really didn't solve the problem, as we're finding out now about a decade later. What I think ought to happen is the RCA ought to stand up and say, look, it's our responsibility to get this thing under control, to define the issue. NSTAR, come in here and give us your supply curve. Come in here, tell us what you think your demand is going to be, and let's define what the problem really is, as opposed to speeches and explosive headlines. Let's have an on-the-fact record discussion analysis of what the need really is. Is there a shortfall? Where is the shortfall? How much is there? That's what the RCA ought to do. The DNR ought to say, okay, we see this shortfall. Cook Inlet gas supply isn't adequate to respond. We see the shortfall that's going to occur before we can bring in LNG supplies. What do we need to do in order to incentivize additional production to fill that gap that the RCA is now defined? If at the end of that, there isn't enough legislative authority to solve the problem, then those two agencies ought to go to the legislature and say, look, here's the problem. The RCA's done its job. We've defined what the problem is. We've defined the scope of the shortfall. DNR's on its side has tried to address the shortfall through the statutory authority it already has. And we can't get there. We can't close that gap because we don't have the legislative authority to do X. Legislature, would you please prescribe the legislative authority to do X so we can finish closing that gap? But we're not doing that. We're doing it backwards. We're doing the cart before the horse. The legislature is saying, we're going to do this. And we think it'll solve the problem without the RCA first defining the problem, doing its statutory job of defining problem, and without DNR first stepping up and using its existing authorities to try to solve the problem the RCA defines. And you're exactly right. What that leads to, just like in the early 2010s, what that leads to is a very expensive solution, subsidies that far outreach, the scope of the problem that's necessary to solve the problem, and they don't solve the problem on top of it. We ought to take this. We've got a statutory setup that does this. Alaska has enough foresight to set up the statutory authority to do this, to set up the agencies to do this. We ought to allow them to do their job, tell them to do their job. One thing I told House Resources when I testified before them a couple of weeks ago was, I'm shocked you haven't called the RCA in here to put the RCA on the carpet and say, what are you doing about defining this problem? It's your statutory obligation to get it defined. What are you doing about defining the problem? They haven't done that. I mean, they just sort of left to a conclusion without letting the agencies that have been set up address the problem.
Well, this reminds me of the old Patton quote that basically where he looked at somebody and said, decision-making is easy once you have all the facts. It feels like we're not getting all the facts and running, and checking all the boxes before we run to the end of the conclusion and say, we've got to give them money no matter what. And again, once that issue is politicized, and it has become a very political issue, now, and it starts to raise my eyebrows at some point. I'm not a conspiracy theorist that says, well, there is no, is there really a shortage? But until they've actually outlined it and laid it all out and given us, metrics and had the RCA look at it and DNR look at it, you got to be like, well, are they just crying wolf to get more Are they just to get more relief, to get more government money? They saw what happened before. God, we spent $1 billion almost in tax credits on this stuff in the past and received very little in return. So, at some point you got to be asking they're all protesting, and talking about it. But where are the organizations and the departments that have put in place specifically to address it, to lay it out, to give us the metrics, and to make those decisions? Where is that information? Now, you brought this up to the committee. Was there any further discussion on it after you said, "Where's the RCA? Where's the DNR?" I mean, nobody talks about this?
Well, I haven't. I don't know. I mean, the committee's made up of members. Members talk amongst themselves, and they may have had this discussion. There's an RCA hearing this week that I'm been asked to provide public comment at, and I'm going to say the same thing. That look, you have an obligation to step up and help define the problem. You step up and define the problem. You really can't have a utility executive out there crying wolf and not have the RCA, which has the statutory obligation to regulate that utility, the RCA step up and say, what the heck is going on? Give us the facts, and let's have a hearing to define what's going on and to define what their solutions are. Right. This is a replay of the gas shortage in the lower 48 in the 1970s.
Right.
And there, the regulatory commission at the time, the Federal Power Commission, as it was called, ultimately became the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Federal Power Commission stepped up and started having hearings, pipeline by pipeline. What's your situation? What's your shortfall? What's the problem? How are we going to address this? Right. And ultimately went to Congress and said, look, we need to let the market decide. We need to have market forces decide what the value of gas is. We had the Deregulatory Act in 1978, and all of a sudden the problem was solved. But we went through the process.
Right.
We didn't say Congress throw a bunch of money at it. We went through the process of defining what the problem was.
Rob Myers actually says, I think he may say the quiet part out loud. He says, the state has spent 50 years fixing problems with subsidies. It's lost the ability to think about any other ways to fix problems, which I think is really a true issue. I mean, he's not wrong. Although there is some good news. Representative Tom McKay says, we are looking into the RCA and will schedule them to report to us, and that we are not looking at the tax credit program from the past. So those are good. Those are good moves, and I'm happy to see it. But this should have been the first thing, I guess. I'm in agreement with you, Brad. This should have been the first thing. All right, quickly, give me a tease for number three. We're already to 3.
Well, there's a proposal in the Senate to rein in the governors, or to reset how the legislature looks at overriding vetoes, financial vetoes, fiscal vetoes.
Oh yeah,
and I think and the problem to me is really on the legislature side. The legislature is the one that has the too much power when it comes to fiscal matters. So I'm going to be talking about that.
All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, is our guest. We're going to continue one final segment dead ahead. Come on in and join us. Make sure you share with your friends. Tell us about every Tuesday. Brad comes in to give us the details on what he thinks are the 3 biggest issues with the weekly top 3. And, of course, you can always share the podcast later on, or the simulcast on Facebook or YouTube. You can share these out. Feel free to get more Alaskans involved in the conversation. The Michael Duke Show continues. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show, because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Tom also says that NSTAR is reporting to Senate Resources this week. So good. I mean, that's good. We should be asking them questions about that kind of stuff.
But again, I would say that's getting the cart before the horse. The RCA is the frontline agency that the statutes have set up to look at these issues, to govern these issues, to be responsible for these issues. And if NSTAR is out there pleading that they don't have enough gas, it ought to be the RCA that's stepping up. And it's important from this standpoint. It's important from the standpoint of defining the problem. I think a lot of us are thinking, well, or a lot of people are thinking, well, we just don't have enough production coming from the Cook Inlet gas. We're just going to subsidize them, and I'll explain why it's a subsidy in a moment. We're going to subsidize them with a lot more subsidies, and they're going to go out and develop a lot more gas, and that'll solve the problem. Well, the problem may be much narrower than that. It may be just a couple of years or 3 years that we have an issue before we can get LNG into the Cook Inlet, which is the ultimate solution. It may be just a couple 3 years, and you don't need to give huge royalty relief to just get a couple of 3 years production. DNR can figure out if the RCA defines it as a couple of years production, DNR should be able to figure out what it takes to get that couple of years of additional production out, and DNR has the authority to do it. What we're doing is what I'm concerned about that we're doing is we're running to one side of the ship and saying we need to give a lot of relief without really having defined the problem. And it's the RCA, not NSTAR. I mean, NSTAR is going to go out there and claim whatever they think is needed to get a low price, right? Their whole incentive is to get a low price for their gas. And they're going to go out and claim whatever they need. The RCA is the one with the responsibility for the oversight of both the price and the supply. And to have NSTAR testifying, I don't think NSTAR will be testifying in front of the RCA. The RCA ought to be testifying in front of the legislature. That's where we're going wrong. One other thing on the subsidies. Royalty relief is a subsidy. What essentially you're doing with royalty relief is you're saying, well, the price ought to be $12, but NSTAR doesn't want to pay $12. And so we're going to give the producers royalty relief so they can sell the gas to NSTAR at $10, and they don't have to pay the additional $2 in royalty to the state. The state's foregoing that $2 in order to enable the producers to sell what the market otherwise would tell them takes $12 to sell it in $10. And the state's the one that's giving up that difference. Essentially, the producers are getting two pots of money. They're getting some from NSTAR in terms of the purchase price, and they're getting some from the state in terms of royalty relief. So we're not talking about cash out, but we're talking about not getting cash in that we would get under royalties, foregoing that cash in, and that is as much a subsidy as putting cash out.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. All right, I'm getting dialed up now for the number 3 of the weekly top 3 because you immediately heard when the veto couldn't be overridden, you started to see a lot of lamentation from everybody about this governor has too much power. He's got too much power and he can't tell us what to do. This is what it sounds like in the Senate side. He can't tell us what to do, which is exactly what it feels like they're saying to the House. You can't tell us what to do. We know best. I mean, they have a pandemic going on in the Senate of we know better than you is what's going on right now. But it's this is. Am I wrong on the tone that's striking this whole conversation there?
Oh no. The Senate's being a bully. I mean, the Senate is trying to be the governor. They're trying to be the governor in the uni legislature. I mean, they want to tell everybody what to do. They aren't a participatory body. They've become the bully body, and trying to control the entire agenda. And as we will discuss in the next segment, there's a statutory. Not statutory. They have constitutionally too much power that's enabling them to be the bully in how they do this. They may have a point or they may not have a point about whether the governor has too much power in certain respects, but it's very clear the legislature has too much power in certain respects and enables the Senate to set up to be the bully in all this.
Well, this is the effect of leadership and the Gold Guard being able to hold all that, to glom all that power into themselves, and you got half a dozen people in a 60-person legislature basically running the whole show, which is what we've been boning about this whole time, right?
Not only running the whole show, running the whole state.
Yeah, exactly. and getting pissed when you tell them you think they're wrong. That's the other part. Not only just not being benevolent dictators, but just dictators. That's what it's all comes down to. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. The weekly top 3 continues. We're going to get back into it. Here we go. Please like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Let's get to it. And right now.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Yeah. The Senate seems to see the House as an advisory committee and the governor as a mere stumbling block and impediment to their rise for full dominance and future in the state of Alaska. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Hit me with this, brother. We are at the point of the Senate now saying they need to have a lower veto override threshold because they know better than anybody else, right? Give me your thoughts on this, Brad.
Well, this particular Senate resolution is a proposed constitutional amendment that would lower the threshold for the veto threshold or the legislative threshold for upholding a veto on budget matters from appropriations matters from the 3/4 that the Constitution sets it at to the 2/3, which would be the equivalent of the veto level for regular overrides. And what this particularly pertains to is the vetoes, the line item vetoes that the governor has made. This governor has made in the past that have been upheld by the legislature as a result of the 3/4 provision, when some feel that the legislature might have been able to override those gubernatorial vetoes if the standard was only 2/3. But that's the legislature's view. We want more power. We want to have a lower threshold for overriding vetoes because we think we know best. And when the governor vetoes something, we want to be able to override him easier than the 3/4 provision provides. Here's what that entire discussion is missing, and what I believe is the constitutional problem with Alaska right now. Let's take the PFD as an example. It's the best example. It's the one that's most on people's minds. But the PFD was passed, is a statute that was passed by a majority of the legislature, signed by the governor at the time, and that's not been changed. The statute's not been changed ever since. It's still the statute on the books. It's still what the law is. The legislature has not mustered, even the legislature has not mustered a majority for changing the PFD, much less gotten the governor to agree. So you have a statutory provision that was signed by the governor at the time that's not been overturned, that prescribes how money should be spent. The remedy for that, if you don't like it, is to change the statute. Muster a majority. The remedy in other states, if you don't like it, is to change the statute. Muster a majority of the legislature to change the statute and get the governor to sign it. Or if the governor doesn't sign it, override the veto. If the governor rejects it by vetoing it, override the veto by 2/3 of the body. In other states, 2/3 of the body, and reset the statute. That's not what goes on in Alaska. Here's what goes on in Alaska is this. The legislature, even with the statute out there, even with it previously been signed by the governor, even without an amendment of it, what happens in Alaska is the legislature can effectively line item veto the appropriation by setting a lower amount. There's no ability for the governor to reset the amount higher if the legislature sets it a lower amount. And the legislature can do that by majority vote. They are essentially violating a previous statute, essentially overturning a previous governor's decision by majority vote, by setting the appropriation for the PFD or whatever whatever statutory appropriation mechanism you've got, they're essentially overturning it by a majority vote. If the governor vetoed it, line item vetoed, the legislature would have to muster a 2/3 vote to overturn what the governor's done. But they're able to overturn statutory previous decisions of previous legislatures, decisions of previous governors. They're able to overturn it by a simple majority vote. That gives the legislature a huge amount of power. They can essentially say, we are not going to appropriate by majority vote. They can say, we're not going to appropriate, even though the statute provides it, even though a previous governor signed it, even though subsequent legislatures have not been able to amend it. They're able to override a statute by simple majority vote. And the governor has no ability to come back in and say, wait, unlike the legislature, where if the governor line items an appropriation, the legislature can come back in and by 2/3 vote say, no, we're going to go ahead with, or 3/4 vote, we're going to go ahead with that appropriation. The governor has no appeal rights when the legislature line item vetoes a statute, a previous statutory provision, line item vetoes it by majority vote. The governor can't say, but wait, this is what the statute says. I want to enforce the statute. Make this appropriation. You know, you could set it up where that could happen with a 2/3 legislature vote, just like the legislature can override the governor with a 2/3 vote. If the governor appeals something, the legislature has to override a previous statute, override the governor with a 2/3 vote. But that's not what's going on. We're giving the legislature, the Constitution as interpreted, gives the legislature the power of line item veto with a simple majority vote. And the legislature is using that to bully the process by saying, no, we're not going to live up to the statutory obligation we have. We're not going to live up to what previous governors done have signed. We know we don't have enough votes to change it, but we're just going to line item veto it. And governor, you have no power to do anything about that. And so we're gonna take your and this goes for all of the governor's priorities. We're going to take your priority and we're just going to cap it through our power of majority vote on the appropriation. And you have no power to appeal that. We have the power to appeal you by overriding your vetoes. You have no power to appeal us, even when it involves a statute. And so if we're going to start fixing the imbalance of power that some believe exists in the state, then that's another place. That's a place we need to fix it also. The legislature's power to override previous legislatures, to override previous governors, to override their inability to fix a statute, to change a statute, override all of that by simple majority vote. If we're going to start rebalancing the power between the bodies, that's a place that we need to do it as well.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We're down to the last couple minutes here, Brad. So just I guess a summation here and maybe a quick question on your thoughts here.
Well, I think that the legislature really needs to, the Senate in particular, needs to stop bullying the other two bodies. The Senate needs to start living up to its responsibility as a collegial body to work with other bodies in government, both the House and the governor. And I think one way of forcing them to do that, if we're going to start messing with the Constitution, one way of forcing them to do that is to put in the Constitution that the legislature has the obligation to live up to statutes. The governor might veto it. The legislature might override it if by 2/3 vote. But the legislature has the obligation to live up until they have the votes to change a statute, until they have the votes to change a statutory appropriation. The legislature has the obligation to live up to a statute. That would make them the equivalent to bodies in other states. What we've done in Alaska is given the legislature, and indeed one branch of the legislature, because it takes both bodies to appropriate. If one body refuses to appropriate, then that shuts the process down. We've given one body in the legislature too much authority.
Well, this is what happens when you think you're the smartest person in the room, regardless of the proof to the contrary. You believe you're the smartest person in the room, so you need to make all the decisions, which I think is what's happening with the Senate right now. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you, my friend, for coming on board. As always, it's good to talk with you. I appreciate you coming into the show.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
All right, folks, we got more coming up. Hour 2 is dead ahead. Be kind, love one another, live well. We'll see you on the other side. Two things. Marcus, I want to answer this question, but let me get to Marcus's question here in a second. Tom McKay made a comment, which I would like Brad to respond to. He says, Cook Inlet is a very mature, remote, isolated oil and gas basin with a very limited market, very different from Brad's experience in the lower 48. So because it doesn't match your experience in the lower 48, Brad, how do you answer that when you say this is not your normal, I guess your expertise as an oil and gas expert is being called into question here because this is a different field.
Cook Inlet is connectable to the lower 48 through LNG. I mean, Cook Inlet becomes the same experience as the lower 48 as a result of imported LNG. We bring in supplies from additional sources of supply in order to meet the demand. It is a mature field. It has been the single source of supply for South Central. That's part of the problem. It's the single source of supply for South Central, and so it's sort of been able to demand things. The producers have been able to demand things that doesn't occur elsewhere because you got additional sources of supply. Once we bring in LNG, the ability to bring in LNG into South Central, we have the same situation as in the lower 48. You've got additional supply sources that can come in.
And finally, let me get to Marcus's question, and I asked him to clarify. I don't know if this is a typo or not, but he says, Brad, what's the number one thing we can do to influence politicians? I'm not sure he's saying uninfluence them or influence them, but what's the number one thing we can do to have, I guess, our voice be heard is what he's asking.
I articulate different things. Part of the problem here is the unlimited is campaign finance issues, that politicians can finance their campaigns off of one or two contributors. They don't have to go out and get a broad base of support from a number of contributors because Alaska has no, at a state level, Alaska has no campaign finance contributions. They can go out and get all the money they need from one or two contributors. And I think that's part of the problem, because then they only have to listen to that certain select group of contributors. There's no, in the lower 48, you find small money having a big influence in campaigns. You don't find that here because of the unlimited campaign finance. So if I was going to say there's one thing that could have a long-term impact on correcting the situation, it would be significantly lower the campaign contribution levels to make politicians go out and have to get a broad base of support to finance their campaigns. Reduce their ability, take away their ability to finance the campaigns from one or two or just a select group of donors.
They need to get more of a consensus at that point from a variety of donors.
Yep.
That makes sense. Tom follows up to say, all predictions I've seen showed imported LNG to be much more expensive than what? But much more expensive than producing our own gas, developing and drilling, bringing a pipeline down from the North Slope. Compared to what? It's the most expensive option that we have, I think, is to put too fine a point on it.
Well, much more expensive than current supplies, but what Tom is not articulating, or Tom's not looking at, is the analysis that said to develop additional supplies out of the Cook Inlet, it will take price levels that are much higher than current price levels, and indeed much higher than imported LNG, that we can bring in supplies of imported LNG at a much lower price point than additional Cook Inlet supplies. And my concern is that we will continue to say, oh no, it needs to come from the Cook Inlet, and pour more and more and more subsidies, either in the forms of royalty relief or other things, in order to keep the Cook Inlet price down. We don't need to be doing that. There are alternative sources of supply, such as LNG, that are much less expensive than the price levels we're going to have to get to extract those additional Cook Inlet supplies. So this argument isn't about what the current Cook Inlet price is compared to LNG. The argument is about what is it going to take to bring in additional supplies to meet the long-term supply obligations.
The long term, that's the point. The long-term supply. I mean, how long do we have to subsidize it? But how long does he have? How long do we have to subsidize the bill to keep them down low to their current level? And how much does that cost? And who pays that? We're paying it, and we will be paying higher bills. We just won't see it because it'll be taken in the form of some other tax that we just don't see, and we don't connect it to our electric bills. Tom says Brad's technically correct, but does not have constituents who pay power bills. Well, sure. But again, the constituents will pay the lower power bill, but get dicked in the back over here because they are getting money taken out somewhere else. I mean, that's the problem.
That's Venezuela. I mean, I with all due respect, Tom, that's Venezuela. We want to keep the gasoline bills down, so we're going to use government money, or we're going to use other money to keep gasoline bills down. The question is, who's paying that other money? In Alaska, it's PFD cuts. We're taking money out of middle and lower income Alaska families in order to subsidize South Central gas consumers, and
right.
that's a problem. I mean, you can see what it's done to Venezuela. If we're trying to always subsidize our way down to lower prices, if we're gonna just ignore the market and say we're going to continue subsidizing forever in order to keep these prices down, then somebody's going to be paying, and somebody's going to be paying more and more and more and more, and it's going to come in the form of lost PFDs.
I've only got 30 seconds. We can't even respond. Okay, I can't even respond because
we did this in the hearing, Tom. I mean, it's in the hearing. Anybody who wants to know the answer to these questions, it's in the hearing record.
All right, Brad, thank you, my friend. I could keep you on for another 20 minutes already on this. All right, thank you for being part of it today. We appreciate it.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
Folks, we got to go. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Welcome to hour 2 of this beautiful Tuesday. Thank you for coming on board and joining us. We just finished up with Brad Keithley with Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. And with Representative Tom McKay is in the chat room and has been asking some questions and making some comments during this morning's show. And there's a couple things here that I want to dissect. Again, with no offense, and maybe we should ask Representative McKay if he wants to call in. He and I could talk about this and discuss this a little bit further for the breakdown. So I guess I'll fire up the phone lines here if Representative McKay wants to call in and ask questions about this. He can give us a shout here. because I'm about to launch into this, and I don't want him to feel like I don't want him to feel like he doesn't have a voice in this. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the phone lines just for Representative McKay here, and get a and get a little talking point on this, because Brad was just finishing up during the break and talking about some of the problems with the idea of the LNG and what's going on in the Cook Inlet and everything else. So I just posted the phone number in the chat room there, Tom, if you're still with us, if you stuck around, because I've got some questions on some of your comments here in what's happening. Brad was talking specifically about how the Cook Inlet gas is an issue that should be talked about first and foremost by the RCA, the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, which is the overseeing body for utilities, especially in light of the fact that John Sims, the president of NSTAR, made a speech last week about the dearth of gas in the Cook Inlet and causing more problems, that the problem is deeper than we ever considered or we ever thought. And Brad's comment is that basically the RCA needs to jump in there and start asking questions about what's really going on, getting a handle on it, getting some actual metrics, and then, moving on from there. Well, Tom had some comments and questions back. Now, Brad sat in front of his committee a week or two ago and answered a lot of these questions. And he, hopefully, I thought did a pretty good job in answering a lot of those questions. But I want to dissect a few of these things, and hopefully, hopefully Tom is not too upset about this. But maybe he's on us. Maybe he just joined us to talk about it. So let me see if this is Tom, and we'll see if we can get him on. Good morning. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Tom McKay calling from Juneau, Michael.
Good morning, Representative McKay. Thank you for calling in. I didn't want to throw you under the bus or anything here, and I wanted to have a conversation because you made some comments here, and I have some questions about it. So, first and foremost, you just heard Brad talking about all this, and I know he came and spoke in front of your committee here earlier this month.
Yep.
And so, give me your thoughts, particularly on this. On what he had to say about the RCA and the DNR should be taking the lead on this rather than making it a political issue or some kind of political solution. Give me your thoughts on his comments on that to begin with before we move on.
Well, I would love the RCA and the DNR to solve this. And we've been talking to the DNR steadily about it. Of course, I'm getting a darn.
Sorry about that. I know you had an echo. I apologize. I forgot to push a button. Go ahead and go ahead there. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So our problem in the legislature is we're only down here 4 months. So there's kind of this urgency to solve everything between January and May, and then go home and wait till the next January. So there is a little bit of urgency to address things while we're here. And I would love for the RCA and the DNR to solve this problem. I mean, that'd be great. But we wanted to be ready in case they don't. We've tried to be proactive on the Cook Inlet gas issue, and we've tried to look at all our options. I've got like 5 or 6 energy bills that are in the mill down here to address the issue. And Brad and I had a really good discussion. I don't like to call it an argument with Brad. He's very bright. He's very astute on this issue because of his experience in the lower 48. And we listened real carefully to what he had to say. And I wish we had all the options that you have available when you're in Oklahoma or Texas or Louisiana. But we don't. We don't have jackup rigs sitting waiting to go to work at a moment's notice. we only have 3-4 companies that are operating in Cook Inlet. One of them, Hillcorp, seems to be doing very well. The other 3 have varying degrees of struggle. We know there's gas out there. There's more gas that can be developed. It's just a matter of putting together a fiscal regime that will enable the private sector to develop it for us.
Right.
Imported LNG sounds really good, but it could be a lot more expensive. And are my constituents willing to pay a lot higher power bills to import LNG? We don't think so.
Right. Well,
so we're trying to look at local alternatives. The other thing about imported LNG is how many jobs does it displace in Cook Inlet?
Right. Well, I mean, here's
a lot of guys make their livelihoods. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you all right. Go ahead. Finish your thought there,
Michael. Okay. There's a lot of people make their livelihoods working in oil and gas in Cook Inlet, and importing LNG displaces those jobs. So there's a socioeconomic factor that politicians have to consider besides just the simple solution of importing LNG.
Okay, so let me break this.
Anyway, I better take a break and let you respond, Michael.
Yeah, no, let me just give you some of my thoughts here. I mean, again, you said in the chat that all predictions show that imported LNG is much more expensive, which you just mentioned. And so, I mean, I guess my question is much more expensive than what? Than exploring, than subsidizing the Cook Inlet. And if we subsidize, how long do we have to subsidize? Is this in ad infinitum? Does it happen, from now until the end of time? Sure. If the government pays for a huge portion, we can make anything economic. The question is, who pays for the government subsidy?
That's right. And I'd rather not do that. I'd rather not do that, Michael. But again, we're kind of in a box, and we've relied on Cook Inlet to supply South Central for so many years. And I wish I could I've got another bill to try to build a gas pipeline from the slope, but that'll take, several more years.
Right.
And to take care of this problem.
Well, and you also said that Brad believes our power bills increasing by a large amount is just fine. But isn't that? I mean, I don't know if that's Brad. I don't know if that's Brad or if it's just market forces. I mean, things do change. Things happen. Wells dry up. Things, things have to change.
Well,
and the question is, let me finish. Yeah. If they do change. I mean, we do have more expensive power in the long run. Now, trust me, I came from Fairbanks. You want to talk about large power bills? If there's an equity issue, I mean, I don't know what the deal is. That's called life, and that's called the free market. Sometimes bills increase, sometimes they decrease. It'd be nice if we could find a huge gas find in the Cook Inlet. If that works out, great. But if not, shouldn't we as adults expect that things could change and things could get more expensive?
What I'm concerned about is, and I agree with Brad to let the free market dictate what happens. So Brad's theory is to let the gas price rise, and then the rigs will show up, and the investment will show up, and the wells will appear. And from my chair, what if that doesn't happen? In other words, basically sit and do nothing. What if that doesn't happen? What if the rigs don't show up? What if the wells don't appear, and we're in a worse position? So I'm not sure doing nothing is an answer, but that's what we're grappling with.
Right.
And again, I'm not arguing with Brad. His principles are tried and true.
Right. And I guess this is my final comment, and this is what really spurred me to start talking about this, was your comment about what about all the jobs lost in the Cook Inlet to imported LNG? If we do decide to go the LNG route, which, I mean, in the long run may be cheaper, maybe not. I mean, we need to have more discussions on it. But the question is, what about all the jobs lost in the Cook Inlet to imported LNG? That's the question you ask. And to me, I say, again, this is the market, Tom. This is what happens. Sometimes the bad news is that sometimes good people, lose jobs, have to change. They, their positions get things, technology comes in, something happens. I mean, while we feel for the people who may lose their job, I mean, I could lose my job tomorrow. It could happen. The question is, do we look to government to subsidize everything? And yes, no, we're not talking about taking money out of the treasury per se, but we're talking about subsidizing, reducing royalties, money that would come in to pay for other things. So eventually we are paying for it, even if it's not direct cash out of the treasury. But again, people do lose their jobs. It's not government's position to come in and swoop in and to pay and subsidize things just because people lose their jobs. That happens. It's a tragedy for those people or their families, or it's a big change or a shakeup or a hardship, but that's life. That's what happens. It's not government's, it should not be government's position to try and fix that.
Well, it's easy to say that from behind a radio microphone or from Brad Keithley's living room. But when you're sitting in a legislature's chair, higher power prices and lost jobs is a double hit. And, I just want to make sure we have a really lengthy conversation before we allow that to happen.
Well, I'm not against the lengthy conversation. What I'm against, Tom, is the idea that government should be the solution for those kind of free market issues, for those kind of things that happen to everyone. Just because I'm in a business, for example, like I said, I could lose my job tomorrow, but because I'm not in a business that affects the public economy, I'm not going to be able to come to the legislature and say I lost my job in radio and you guys need to bail me out. Again, that's part of the problem with the mindset. And I know it's hard because people come in with their stories about they're losing this or their house or their marriage or because they've lost their job. But should it be, I guess this is a fundamental question, and I'll let you go at this, but this is a fundamental question. Is it government's job to make sure that all these people remain employed and that everybody has the lowest cost energy that they can get? Should the government be expending hundreds of millions of dollars to make all those things happen for that certain sector of the community?
Well, wait a minute. Well, it's way more than just the Cook Inlet. You're talking about the whole rail belt, and the PCE is affected by this. And if we have higher energy prices, Michael, it affects the BSA that we're trying to increase for the education community will be completely ate up by higher energy prices. So low-cost energy is critical to our economy. We're not talking about just broadband internet here. We're talking about our base fuel energy supply. This isn't just some, boondoggle. We're talking about the core foundation pillar of our economy, which is our local base fuel energy supply.
I mean, I'm not arguing that cheap energy is the basis. Serious. Yeah, I'm not saying that cheap energy is not the basis of any, major economy, and it should be. My question remains, should we be expending hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of however many years just to the things that you said, talking about people losing their jobs or higher energy prices? People in Fairbanks pay 2 or 3 times what I'm paying down here. I know, because I used to be that guy. So the question is, it can be done. It's not pleasant. It's not painful, but is its government's job to come in and pay for those things? Because again, somebody eventually has to pay the other end of that kick, one way or the other.
Yeah, well, I guess it is our job to decide whether or not we do that. I guess that's and I'm trying to get a gas pipeline down to Fairbanks so they can finally have low cost energy. So we're trying to solve these problems. Infrastructure, a gas pipeline, consider it a round road,
Right.
That's what I call it.
All right. Well, Tom, I appreciate it. I know I appreciate you calling in and answering some of the questions, because I have questions, and you and I should probably have a deeper conversation about this here in the near future. We'll invite you back on the program and we can talk about it a little more. Okay.
I would love to, Michael. Thanks for the opportunity. And I really consider it's not an argument. It's a good discussion.
It's a good discussion. All right. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. All right, folks, we got to go. We're up against the break. We're going to continue here. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay. So the problem in all this is I don't think he was understanding my point in the with what I was saying about the employees and everything else like that. When he said, what about the loss of the jobs in the Cook Inlet to imported LNG? Again, if there's a better solution, if LNG in the long term, without government subsidies, is the better long-term solution, then yes, you could lose jobs in the Cook Inlet. You could lose jobs on the North Slope. You could lose jobs anywhere. And while each and every individual one of those job losses is a tragedy for those people, and I'm not trying to minimize that, I'm saying that happens. That happens all the time. Technologies change, things change. I mean, the whole, this, and again, to say, well, we're not talking about taking cash out of the Treasury. A subsidy in the form of a royalty reduction still means that money that would have come into the Treasury to pay for something else is now been consumed by that, and you have to find a substitute for that money to pay for what you were going to pay for in the first place. And he says, I understand Brad's economic theories very well, but we sit in different chairs. What it means is Tom has to face people and be able to explain why they're making the decisions that they're making. And he's a very, he's a heartfelt guy. When somebody tells him a story about how they're losing their job, he feels it. I understand that. But that reminds me again of John Coghill saying, well, you just don't understand. People come into my office all the time and they tell me these stories. And that's why I put this money in these bills for them, because they're stories. And okay, so because they can afford to come down there, or they go down there and they tell you their sob story, all of a sudden you can use government money to solve their problems, to salve their wounds. I mean, I'm not trying to beat up on Tom here. I'm just saying that's life. Now, if I lost my job tomorrow, would I be upset? Absolutely. Would I be scrambling? Yes, absolutely. Would I be, would it be a hardship? Absolutely. But would I look to government to come in and save me? No. That's the problem. Matthew says, old Tom just couldn't say out loud that it's not government's job to supply all the desires of its residents. I mean, he maybe he didn't understand my question specifically, but that's what I was trying to get. Is it government's job to make sure all those people in the Cook Inlet are employed? To make sure all those things are, ideally, no. Lisa and Gary said our electricity just went up again, so we feel the pain, and our food bank is getting slammed because prices on everything went up. I mean, exactly. We see that it's happening all the time. Let me, I got one line on hold. I was going to turn the phones off, but I just looked up and see one line's on hold. Let me see who's on the phone. Let me see who this is. Good morning. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Michael, this is Carlene in Kodiak.
Hello, Carlene.
Is there alternatives? Could people be given a loan to put in alternative energy?
I don't know if there is or not, Carlene. I don't think so. Would that fix the problem? I don't know. But again, is it government's job to try and find those things is the bigger question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Carlene. Appreciate you calling in. All right. I'm going to turn the phones off because I don't need those for the next segment.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. All right. Let me, okay. Sorry. When I see something like that, it just, Tom's comment on, well, what about the jobs? Well, what about the jobs? What about everybody else who loses their jobs in all these other sectors? Is it government's position that they need to come in and swoop in? Or is it only because the special jobs that have to do with energy or state funding or contracts or support, is it only those jobs that are good enough to save and spend state money on? I think that's the bigger question. All right, I got to go.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke show.
All right, welcome back. Here's my basic question. I will ask it right now. The basic question is it government's job to provide for, to promote, and protect people's jobs in certain fields? Tom was specifically talking about all the workers in the Cook Inlet. Well, what about them losing their jobs? Well, what about them losing their jobs? If things change, whether it's technology or the amount of gas that's available, if the work is not there, is it government's job to subsidize those positions and protect them from losing their jobs simply from the fact that because of who they are or where they work? If somebody loses their job in the private sector at a retail establishment because that store decided for economic reasons to close, is it the government's job to then subsidize it to keep it open so that they keep their jobs? Or is it only because it's the energy sector, which is important? I'm not debating the fact that, cheap, affordable energy is the cornerstone of any great civilization. It really is. If you trace it back to, in history, when we started to get cheap, affordable energy, that was the kickoff to the Industrial Revolution and everything else. We need cheap, affordable energy. But Instead, what we've got is people saying, well, I just couldn't see those people lose their jobs. The problem is somebody has to pay for it. Randy says, well, what's wrong with adjusting a royalty a little lower to make a gas project economic? Well, again, Randy, this again shows why you understand the economics of somebody has to pay for that. Adjusting the royalty a little lower to make because Tom said, well, this is money not coming directly out of the Treasury. Well, yes, if you adjust a royalty payment, you're not taking money directly out of the Treasury per se. What you're doing is you're shorting the money to the. If you were supposed to pay $100 million in royalties to the Treasury, and you only end up paying 50, that means there's a $50 million hole in the Treasury. That money would have been spent on something, some program somewhere, which means that program didn't go away. That's something that you had, those employees, those benefits, whatever it was you were going to pay with that $50 million, they didn't go away. It means that money has to be taken from something else. So, again, we can't just look at this as, and Tom said, well, these people come to me and I hear their stories and that I'm in this chair and you're not on my side of the chair. You don't hear the tales of woe, etc. He didn't say that, but I'm just paraphrasing what he said. And while I understand that would be a tough position to hear somebody's story to say, oh, you lost your job, you could lose your house, maybe your marriage is in trouble now because you've lost your job unexpectedly or whatever. But that's life. That does happen. Like I said, businesses close down. Kmart pulls out of the area and you lose your job, or technology happens and your job gets replaced. Consolidation occurred. You should see consolidation in radio. I mean, when I first started working at radio stations in this state, a long time ago, but man, there was 35 employees in a building. That same building with more stations, with 35 employees with 5 stations. You get a station now that's got 8 or 9 stations, and they're running the whole thing with 18 people. Why? Well, because of technology. Because things got easier, because, the things changed and and that job got phased out and things happened and people lost their jobs. And, sometimes it happens just through attrition. As they move, you just don't rehire. Sometimes they retire, you don't rehire. Sometimes you got to lay people off. Why is it government's job to come in and fix these things? That's where the problem lies. The problem lies is that government is trying to pick winners and losers. Tom is all about protecting the jobs of the people who are working in the Cook Inlet oil and gas field, but what if they laid off a bunch of people in retail or in radio or in the service industry? Who are the winners and who are the losers? Well, the oil and gas people got some lobbyists that are down there in Juneau, reminding them of how bad it would be if they lost their jobs. Meanwhile, the person working down at the Checkers or whatever it is, behind the counter, scanning goods for people, they don't have a lobby down there. Government is generally trying to fix the problems that it created. 100%. What the problem is that governments have intervened in the free market, and every time they touch the free market, it causes ripples, which causes more problems, which then they try to fix, which causes more ripples, which then that is the problem. And again, that was the question I was trying to ask Tom, and he and I will have a further discussion on this and a further debate down the road. But again, the question is it government's job to protect those, is it government's, to protect those jobs in the Cook Inlet or on the North Slope? And if those, why not the ones that are driving taxi cabs? Why not the one, when Uber came in? And shouldn't we have been protecting? Well, they tried, right? That was the protectionism of the chauffeur's license and everything else. I mean, they tried, but things changed. What about the retail sector? What about the food and beverage, the hospitality industry? What about radio? What about all these where people lost their jobs? Is it government responsibility to make sure those people are employed and pay subsidies to make sure that they get it? Because how long does that last? How long does that, if you have to have a subsidy to make sure these people stay employed, how long does that subsidy last? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, perpetuity? That's the question that people should be asking themselves, and nobody is. And even when I ask the question, it seems like I'm misunderstood. That somehow they're just not understanding the question. Is it government responsibility to do all that? Or is it mine? No, I don't want to pay higher energy costs, but I understand if I have to. Is it a burden? Absolutely. But I also understand that you can't keep looking to government to bail us out of all those problems because that money has to come from somewhere. All right, we got to go. Chris Story's up next, The Michael Luke Show.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
I mean, I'm sorry. I'm just starting to get a little agitated by that. This is that whole attitude of, again, that was the John Coghill. John, why did you put all this money in this bill? You went down as a conservative. Why did you end up spending money on all these programs? Well, because people came into my office and they were upset and they were hurt and they were, and I just, in my good Christian duty to help take care of people with my money, with everybody's money. That's the answer. I'm going to bet that you as a radio talk show host probably talk to more real Alaskans than the average legend critters. And not just as a radio talk show host. I mean, I run radio stations. I talk to business owners every single day about their needs for marketing, for more employees, for recruitment, about how business is going. I mean, where is the government propping up all those people? It's only certain sectors. Oh, the telecom people. They got the oil and gas people. Oh, okay. They got the service people that service the government. Oh, we've got to make sure that they get propped up. The education complex. Well, they can't lose their jobs. Barbara says, I'm still waiting to hear why Fairbanks families and families across the state should pay for a project that will not benefit them. This is many people who are outside the rail belt. Now, they'll make the argument that the Intertie shares some of that thing with Fairbanks and they get some costs and blah, blah, blah. But it's all BS. Herder says, I don't want to be saved by the government. I don't want to be saved by the government. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. How many people are going to lose their jobs when AI becomes the norm? Is government going to take care of them? Well, they're probably going to try. Probably going to try. All right, let me see if I can get this damn thing to work. Oh, I'm agitated now. Holy cow. I'm agitated. Let me go over here and see if we can get this thing to actually dial up. Hey, look at that. It worked on the first try.
Wow. I don't know. This doesn't feel like a safe space.
This is not a safe space. If you want government to come in and save you story, I'm going to bring the beat down to you. I'm going to bring you the beat down.
I'm thrilled they're taking half the PFD because government's not here to solve the problem. They should take the whole PFD.
Yeah.
Government's not here to supply solutions to.
I am going to smash you in the mouth is what I'm going to do. I'm going to smash you right in the mouth.
Oh, found the soft spot, baby.
Yeah. Well, because again, you believe that the PFD should just go, that the government should just spend it as they will, that we don't need it.
Oh, that's man, you are in a bad mood today.
No, I mean, am I wrong? Am I wrong? Tell me where I'm wrong.
You are.
Okay, so what do you don't believe that you don't believe Alaskans have the right to their natural resources or to what Hammond's vision of passing some of that money to the people was about. You believe the government should take all that and utilize it for the highest best interest.
No, I never said that. But I do reject Brad Keithley's constant promotion of an income tax and class warfare. That's
okay,
all.
But
That's
what about Don't deflect. What about the PFD? What about the PFD? Do you believe that the Alaskans have the right to their share of the mineral resources and that the PFD is the payment of that, the ultimate expression of capitalism in that form? Or do you believe the government should have the full right to take the full PFD?
Expression of capitalism. Oh, you're taking me down this road, aren't you, Michael? The last time you and I talked about this, and I love to push back on you because it helps inform my own opinion. I only ever bring up the PFD to you sidebar conversations because I cannot stand the class warfare conversation that Brad brings to the show every week, which is to say the 1% and the 1% and the 1%, they're not paying enough, blah, blah, blah. I just can't stand that argument. But I don't mind the PFD. It's fine.
Okay. All right. You don't mind the PFD, but you just don't want.
It should only go to property owners.
It should only go to property.
If it's going to be about a mineral sharing, of which we're precluded because the federal government owns and state owns the mineral rights, then shouldn't it only go to property owners? That's the devil's advocate.
Well, I mean, that's a great argument to have. You could have that argument, and I could live with that argument and discuss it. But the idea that the PFD should not be on first call, which is what all the mean, the verbiage, the intent language, everybody else, when they created the PFD, that's what they believed. It should have been a transfer. But again, it's the
No, Walker did a bad thing, and he should never be elected to anything ever again. And I think he should move to China because remember he wanted to partner with the Chinese. So no, Walker did a bad thing. I just like to push back on you because somebody's got to. I guess Tom took that this morning.
Yeah, Tom sent me out. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now we're really 20 seconds out. I just want to spar with Chris. I just want
double bells.
I just want to beat up on somebody at this point. Okay.
You should have kept Tom on the line.
Should have kept Tom out there. The problem, I don't think he was understanding my question or intentionally not understanding my question. All right, we're going to jump back into it. I don't even know what you're going to talk about, but you're going to tell me here in a second. The Michael Duke Show. Okay, so I was beating on Chris here during the break just a little bit. I kind of feel bad, but not really. But maybe this will bulb your ego up there. Barbara says, "Oh, the voice of sanity, Christ story." So apparently your status has been raised to Savior.
Well,
Christ.
My name is Christopher, and Christopher by origin is bearer of the cross bearer. So
yeah.
I will say that today is my day to try to lift you up, Michael. It's a dark place in your mind right now, and I just want to bring a flashlight and illuminate that dark place and bring you back to your jovial spirit, your Santa Claus-like nature.
Well, maybe maybe that's why they named me Michael, the Avenging Archangel. I don't know. Maybe that's what it's all about. Could be. Anyway, hey. So yeah, sure. Talk me down off the ledge, buddy. I was a little agitated by some of the things that came up in the last hour. You obviously bore the brunt of that coming into the show here. So but you
mean the mischaracterizations of my opinions? Yes, that was a cudgel against which I resisted. But today I want to talk about. I watched a TED Talk the other day, and that's a really good use of your time if you have 10 or 15 minutes where you want to just listen to an idea, where there's something out there in the world that you're like, I wonder. And probably, if you're wondering about it, somebody somewhere is probably giving a TED or a TEDx talk about it. And I was just thinking the other day about something, and randomly I found this guy called Joe Mull, and he gave this great speech about how gossip starts at work and spreads. So why does it start around the office, around the water cooler, whatever, and how does it spread exactly? And better yet, how to stop it and how to avoid getting sucked into the whirlwind of gossip. And so he says that it's essentially how to handle these situations is to assume good intent. So if you ever you hear somebody spreading something nasty or a disagreement, or you get cut off in traffic, assume good intent and go to the source. And I love his example because he talks about, like, he says, the audience, he says, if somebody shows up late to work consistently, what do you think of them? And almost to a person, he yelled out, lazy, blah, blah, blah. And he said, but what about the day you end up late? Oh, well, traffic, or the sick kid was sick, whatever. We always have this internal bias to give ourselves the best intention and so forth. And he says, do that with everybody you meet. Now, is that really even possible? So I think it is. I think it is possible if you would, for example, somebody who I've known for a long time just recently posted a meme about, if you respect Donald Trump, I cannot respect you. And it's like, oh, okay. So what do you do with that? Well, first off, you could just ignore it, get off social media. That's one thing. The second way to go is to think, maybe not assume good intentions, because there's not much good intention in that statement. However, you could ask, what else is going on? Maybe this person's in pain. Maybe this person's hurting or just really afraid or completely misinformed. Maybe they've been sucked into the Kool-Aid tank of New York Times and NPR exclusively. And you could go to the source. You could assume good intentions and go to the source privately and just say, hey, I saw your meme the other day. Can you explain, where does that come from? What do you really think about that? What's going on? And have a decent conversation like we would have in the old days over a pint in the pub or around a coffee shop. You know what I mean?
Well, did you call that person? And
No,
ask?
I ignored it. I said, "What am I doing on social media?" And I got off social media. That's the alternative. That's the other alternative.
So what you're saying is, when I heard that rumor around the office that Chris Story doesn't support the PFD, then I should just say, I should assume that you had good intentions with that, and that that's all good. We should grapple.
Well, and
that.
I think I'll give you a bit of a pass on how you and Tom, for example. I think you did give Tom the assumption of good intentions relative to his heartfelt, empathetic approach towards the people. I think that was you assuming good intentions and going to the source is when you book him for a full segment or 2 segments to actually just go, okay, let's talk this through, versus just saying, oh, I'm never going to have that guy on. Nope, only people that agree with me. And that's what I really like about your program. You allow all the sides of the conversation. You allow for somebody who might push back against you, or somebody, sycophantic type people that you know who they are, who just love everything you say, talking about your dad. But, there is just this notion that you do assume good intentions by virtue of having to entertain both sides of the conversation. I think we can learn from that. But going back to the guy who cut you off in traffic, you just assume he's a jerk, right? I mean, that's our natural instinct. You're like, what an idiot. Can't believe this guy. On the other hand, he might be headed to the hospital because he just got a call that his wife is in, emergency surgery or something. So there is a way to assume good intentions until you learn otherwise, but also going directly to the source. To your point, if I really cared about what that person thought, I might go to them and just say, hey, I saw your meme the other day. Can we talk about that? There is a way to handle that. I've done that before when I see things on social media or somebody do something publicly that I think, I wonder what else that could mean. What's going on in their life? Because there's something probably that is festering, or there's some confusion, or nothing at all. But to seek first to understand, then to be understood. I'm not going to just write them off completely. So I didn't unfriend that person. That would have been another alternative. I just thought, what am I doing? I need my post. Get out of here.
I would like to say first that my dad is contractually obligated to believe that everything I do is magic. So, I mean, that's you can't call that sycophancy because, again, he's contractually obligated to believe that as his child, that everything is magic. But I mean, you're right. You do have to, and I do. I don't think that Tom has any ill intent. I didn't think that John Coghill had any ill intent. I just believe that he was making an emotional decision versus a rational one. And sometimes we do that. I mean, we fly off the handle. We get upset about something. Like you said, the guy who cuts me off in traffic. Or in the case the other day, I pulled out onto the road. There was plenty of room. And I started to go, but I couldn't get, it just happened to be a slick patch of black ice, and I couldn't get, the guy's laying behind me on the horn. I'm going as fast as I can. Wasn't my intent to cut him off, but it became that situation because I couldn't see the black ice until I got on it, So you gotta, you do have to take those kind of things in stride, and we shouldn't just fly off the handle, but we're almost encouraged these days, Chris, to make a leap of judgment immediately on these kind of things. I mean, this is part of that tribalization and that balkanization of society that we're seeing today, that if somebody does something that we don't understand or agree with, we're immediately supposed to suspect some kind of evil ulterior motives, almost, it seems like.
And a lack of critical thinking, which you and I've talked about many times before, that idea that, for example, Tulsi Gabbard is fantastic. I mean, I've really admired her for some time. I feel like she is somebody who is critically thinking about every issue that she opens her mouth about versus just taking the party line. For example, you may have seen recently Lisa Murkowski is throwing her hands up and saying, I'm not going to get behind Trump. There's rumors she might even switch to her undeclared party that we all know she actually prefers. And so you just think, okay, well, this is interesting. So I'm going to apply some critical thinking. I could react emotionally. I could assume ill intent, or I could assume good intent on any or all of these people, and then just think critically for myself, go to the source. For example, when Kelly Chewbacca was running for Senate here in Alaska, and Mitch McConnell's team was spending $15-16 million trying to defeat her to keep Lisa in her place. I went straight to Senator Sullivan's team and asked, do you support this? I would send them screenshots of the advertisements I was seeing. I would send them links. I would send them the postcards, pictures of the postcards that I'm getting in the mail, inundated with these horrible things about Kelly Tshibaka. And so I just went straight to the source. Now, they never replied, not once, to the Sullivan team, not once. But I just went straight to the source, and I did assume that, Dan's just trying to keep his own seat. Dan's just trying to keep his own power. And in so doing, he probably truly believes it's best for Alaska that he keep his mouth shut and just go over the party line, because that's what keeps the dollars coming back here for his constituents. So it's interesting whether you apply this to politics, you apply this to traffic, you apply it to your family members or people that you're going to break bread with on Easter. Seek first to understand, then be understood. This is an excellent maxim to also then add to assume good intent and go to the source. And it could be just asking questions. Trying to understand where somebody's coming from.
I agree. And I just had an epiphany, kind of a, connectivity moment here. You were saying, you started this conversation with a TED talk about rumors and how rumors in the office and, how you should understand people instead of dealing with it. Isn't social media like rumors evolved at the highest level? I mean, at this point,
yeah,
isn't it really? I mean, like you said, I'm on social media rarely. I do it for the show, obviously, and I'm on it there. I do eventually. Sometimes I'll find myself maybe one day a week. All of a sudden, I find myself doom scrolling on social, and I call it doom scrolling because that's what it is for the most part. But it's like that. It's antagonistic. I just find the whole thing just so irritating to be on because of the feelings that it evokes. And people who live in social media, that's how they feel all the time.
Well, and it's not, and yeah, let's go further. I listened to NPR the other morning for about 22 minutes, and because I went there specifically to see, because I have some incredibly smart friends who are backing Joseph R. Biden for president. They just really think he's doing a good job. And I'm like, how on earth can a thinking person witness, maybe you like the policies coming out of the administration, but to assume or assign anything to that vacuous, empty person who's holding that seat, is how can you be a critical thinking person and see this and go, oh yeah, he's in charge? No, he's not. You could, love his policies if you wanted to, or the policies coming out of the White House. For sure they're not coming from him. He isn't capable of that anymore. So I went there and I listened, and they literally were saying things like, for example, the Biden doctrine and what he does and what he said. And I was just like 22 minutes of just propping him up as a thinking, literate, like a cognizant person. And so I thought to myself, I better understand my very smart friends now, because this is what they're hearing 24/7. They're in that echo chamber. They're not hearing any alternative to it. Okay, I better understand them now. Okay, I get it. Like anybody who might not question something that Fox News is suggesting 24/7.
Right.
Because they're kind of moving in a little different direction than what we knew of maybe even 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And so anybody who's living in just one single silo, I get it. Okay, they don't want to be challenged on their ideas or thoughts about anything. I get it. I understand that more now. I can have at least a little better assumption of where they're coming from.
Or becoming more siloed, right? I mean, it becomes an echo chamber on one. That's why, even when I was watching the news, I still wasn't only watching Fox. I was watching Fox and CNN and MSNBC. I was seeing what everybody was saying to try and find the truth somewhere in the middle, kind of thing. And that's frowned upon these days. If you're listening,
and now we know the truth. The truth actually lives at the Babylon Bee. Period.
Exactly.
That's the best news.
That is 100% truth right there. The Babylon Bee, pretty much future telling. They're fortune tellers, and they just do this amazing thing where they tell the future on that. All right, 90 seconds, Chris. Finish up with your thoughts for understood. First, understand to be understood. Give me it here. 90 seconds.
Yeah. Again, just assuming good intent doesn't mean you're naive. Doesn't mean you're Pollyannic or you're going to be a dupe rolled over. Assuming good intent, in other words, is almost a way of of taking a whiteboard that's got a bunch of markings on it, erasing it, opening your mind, opening your ears, going, you know what, I'm going to go to the source. Go back to gossip. You hear gossip, you hear rumors, say, hey, I heard you're leaving. Go check it out. Like I heard recently a rumor that our city manager was fired here in Homer. I went straight to the source. I went right to the city council and said, hey, has he been fired? They said, yeah. And I went back to Uplift and said, it's not a rumor. It's true. I went to the source. So there you go.
Right. Exactly. As opposed to the Fairbanks the school board president who accused the legislators of taking bribes on a rumor. All right. Anyway, Chris Story. Thanks, buddy. Sorry, didn't mean to make you a pinata. I hope you don't feel empty and full of candy. All right, we will.
No, I love candy.
Yeah, I love candy. We'll see you. We'll see you later. Hold the line for a second, folks. We're out of time. The Michael Duke Show. Common Sense Radio. Mike's Shower on tomorrow. We'll see you then. I meant to mention, too, Dr. Frank is going to be with us. Dr. Douglas Frank is going to be joining us on Thursday. I forgot to mention that earlier.
Good for you. Great.
He's
a good guest.
He is a good guest. Didn't mean to beat up on you too much, man, but I just can't.
Not in the least. No.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure you understand. My point isn't that I like what Walker did. We deserve the formula as it was designed. We deserve that every single year. I just like to push back on you sometimes, especially when I hear the alternative being an income tax is going to be okay because it'll inform and engage the top 1% income earners who don't mind this regressive tax on the
it's
poor
it's because
people
you're in the top 1%, isn't it, Chris? Isn't that it?
we can have. Well, look at Florida. I just can't help it. Like all during the pandemic, Governor Dunleavy and Dr. Crum it's like, what is it? Why can't you see the success Florida's having and mimic it relative to your COVID response? Why can't you see the success that Florida's having and mimic it relative to no income tax, no inheritance tax, and see it thriving? And I do not want any sort of false equivalency or even a debate around one or the other. Like, look, guys, we're going to have a full statutory PFD if we can get this income tax. Because don't forget, when the top 1% income earners in Anchorage working for these big corporations, once they're being charged an income tax, by golly, they'll start paying attention. Nope, sorry, is it not true? They're not going to engage anymore in state government. They're not going to get involved in the BSA. They're not going to do anything different. And if you need a model for that, just look at the IRS and the fact that, we're all paying income tax and how many people are engaged.
I think we should never shy away from the conversation about taxes or anything else. My problem, and I've articulated this to Brad and others before, is the Parkinson's principle of government. Parkinson's principle basically says, that all available work will fill up, all available time will be consumed by all available work. There's a iterative of that talks about money, that essentially says that the government will consume all available money. So if you did have an income tax, they would take all that plus the dividend. So that's the problem. The problem is that they've never seen a pot of money they didn't want to spend, and that's a larger problem.
And I agree. And the conversation needs to be bifurcated. In other words, it's not about an income tax or the lack thereof isn't the reason that Walker broke the bank and he broke the promise and he broke the law and took half the PFD, and every governor thereafter and every legislature thereafter has followed suit. It's not the lack of an income tax. So to conflate the two is where I like to push back on. And our last conversation, if you'll recall, was I was equivocating and saying, hold on, wait a minute. If it's a share of the mineral resources, what about the mining royalties? I know they're much smaller, but where's our portion of it?
Yeah.
And then what about I'm precluded from commercial fishing unless I buy somebody's permit.
Right.
Ought I not get a percentage of those royalties? So I like to play devil's advocate with you. I've never once made a stance that I'm against the PFD. In fact, somebody just texted me and said, I just heard that you don't support the PFD. What the heck? So you owe me something tomorrow. You owe me 5 minutes tomorrow. Set the record straight, pal. I hope you're happy.
The power of radio.
Yes. Thanks a lot. I'm glad that at least, hey, you're ending this on a good note.
Oh, man. Yeah, well, I guess we should have an in-depth PFD discussion, shouldn't we?
That's it. Now we have
to clarify your stance on the PFD. You can come on Thursday at 7:00 if you want. You can come on Thursday at 7, and we'll talk about it. How about that? And we'll clarify it for you.
No, I'm okay. I'd rather talk about my new book coming out, but
I'd like to talk about your new book coming out. Come on down. Bring it on.
All right.
Let's
do it.
7 Thursday.
All right, catch you later, man.
All right, 7
Sounds
Thursday.
good.
All right. Okay, bye. Oh, what he doesn't understand is that I was chewing on him because I knew that's where he was going. All right. Crum is not a doctor. No, he meant and zinc. It was a, there you go. It is what it is. So, all right. Well, we got to fly. We're going to get out of here. The Michael Duke Show continues tomorrow. We'll see you guys then. Thanks for coming in and joining us. Whew. All right, I gotta go. We will see you then. Be kind, love one another, have a good time. Mike Shower up tomorrow. Dr. Frank on Thursday, followed by Chris Story to talk about his new book. There you go. We'll be back. Have a good day.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.